God is indispensable to liberty as we know it and celebrate it in the free world. With every step we take as an American nation away from God, one thing is certain: we lessen our liberty. It was and is no coincidence that America, the freest nation the world's ever known, is also the most God-centered. Many will be quick to cite the Islamic world as a society that exemplifies the antithesis of freedom. However, Allah is not regarded as a source of liberty, but an object of submission. Islam itself means submission. Anyone who attempts to blur this distinction is being blatantly dishonest.
Okay, let's start this. God is indispensable to liberty. That's the first thing that it's said. I can't see what you mean by that statement. Are you saying there's no liberty without God? That's absolute rubbish, so we're just going to carry on. Away from God, it is certain that you lessen your liberty. No, it's not, actually. That, again, is just some statement which actually doesn't mean anything. If you could clarify that would be great. You say the US is the freest nation ever known. Well, it is a fairly free nation. It's also got more red tape than any nation that has ever been known. In fact, during the Soviet Union, Soviet bloc, Cold War era, people that went and filmed in the Soviet Union said how much easier it was to film there than it was, say, filming in the US, where the red tape was appalling. But free in some ways, yes, but the freest ever known? I don't know. I think you're pretty free in Sweden, pretty free in Norway, you're pretty free in lots of nations, actually, are just as free. So I think it's one of those things, land of the free, it gets into the psyche of the nation, but it doesn't mean everywhere else isn't. You say people are blurring the distinction with Islam as being obviously a theocratic country. There is a distinction with Islam, obviously, and you are free to obviously make that distinction. In Islam, perhaps they're not. But do you want to be like Islam? I don't know. I doubt it. And what are you advocating? You're actually saying, yes, we're free from this religious tyranny, but we should, in fact, have a religious country with tyranny of this religion. Well, exactly what it says. Which way are you having it? Which way do you want it? Again, could you clarify that for me, please? Thank you.
Since the dawn of the American experiment, and in fact predating our very colonies, personal liberty and personal freedom have been inextricably linked to the Creator God. We are a nation founded on the very premise that God Almighty is the only true source for such liberty, a declaration of unmovable truth inscribed on our very Liberty Bell.
Okay, quickly, you've got on about the American experiment. Well, I didn't really think it was an experiment. It was just a nation that was being formed at the time. If you go into that time, there was a lot of religious disturbance in Europe. Obviously, it's all stemmed from the uprising and the sort of Protestant movement. And you get on to things like the King James Version of the Bible. He was a Protestant as well, even though his mother was a Catholic. And this was always the way, Catholics against Protestants. And of course you had an English Bible, which was amazing, because before that it was all in Latin, and the only people you actually understood was the priest, who they could understand it and they told you what it meant. And we all know what that means, when priests tell you what things mean. Anyway, you're saying then, American experiment, it was about liberty. Well, it wasn't. It was about people escaping from those sort of Catholics, Protestants, Puritans, all that. They were escaping from those wars, the English Civil War and things like that, where all these things were being brought together and Protestants were killing Catholics, then Catholics were killing Protestants. You got the parliamentary forces that took power, obviously, at the end of the Civil War, and these were Puritan people. But a few years later, everyone went, ooh, we don't want them. They even abolished Christmas. Would you believe that? Something which I think you accuse atheists of wanting to do nowadays. And these were the people that thought, stuff this, I'm going after these new colonies in America and trying to make a new life of it all. And of course, when you get there and everybody gets together, they think, well, hang on, we don't want to start up all that old shit again. Let's have one nation which is secular, and we'll separate the state and religion. And that was a very good idea. So what are you saying now? It ought to be all controlled and back to that strange religious sort of controlling. If there's any reason that you call yourself a land of the free, it's for that very reason. It's free of that oppression that was around at that English Civil War sort of time. Anyway, I'm going to carry on because that'll get a bit boring.
We are indeed endowed, not by man or the governance of men, but by our Creator. certain unalienable rights. Only because our rights are derived from a creator God can we assert that no state, no human being, and no government trample them. If the state be your only bestower of rights, as the secular extremists among you are forced to insist, then said state can take them away, and history proves that take them away they will.
Wow, well that piece sounds just like an Islamic argument, I'm afraid. I listened to that piece and I thought, well, this guy could be talking, he could be talking in Saudi Arabia. This guy could actually be talking in an Islamic country, because that's exactly what it sounds like. Play it back, have a listen. It's weird. I appreciate earlier you said it wasn't, but it sounds just like that's what you're saying. Sorry about the cold I've got, by the way.
Reason, human instinct, and all that we know of man prove that the bigger the significance of the state, the lesser the significance of individual liberty.
Okay, actually, the bigger the state, the more rules you actually need, the more laws you need. This happens in a very minor thing. For instance, when I used to work on my own, I found that there was very few laws actually needed. As I took a couple of staff, some minor laws. I was fairly laid back. Everyone could do more or less what I did. Then you get more and more people in your establishment, and you suddenly find that if one takes the piss, they all take the piss, and you suddenly have to have rules. You have to have laws. And the more people, the bigger the state, the more laws, annoyingly, you have to have. Because people will break them and find little bits. If you looked at the Book of English Law, the very first one, I used to have a copy, and it was only about this thick. Now you'd have massive volumes on English law, filling several rooms, no doubt, in the various statutes and the various tiny little adjustments, and that's what happens. It's got nothing to do with God. I'm sorry.
Our founders knew, therefore, that the opposite must be the basis of our American values. The more important God is in the eyes of free individuals, the less significant the state and the greater the individual. This is the bedrock of our country, from Stalin to Mao, Pot to our present-day secular extremists.
That's it. Stalin, Mao, Pot, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens. They're hardly the same people, are they? It's a bit like saying, here's an extremist Muslim who likes blowing themselves up, and here's a flower-wielding hippie. They're not the same at all. It's just daft.
All of history's controllers of men knew that for their power and tyranny to grow, God must be made less in the minds of men. As we look around us, we see the validity of this timeless truth exemplified everywhere. As this, the freest and greatest country on earth, becomes more godless, it becomes less free. It is not a coincidence that as we move away from our God-centered roots, we see more laws governing the conduct of free men.
Actually, in my experience of history, that when you look at people want more power, it wasn't a case of God being less, it was God being more. People wanted power and they used God to get it. There's plenty of examples. I don't even need to give them. There's hundreds of them. Religious tyranny is something which we've seen throughout history. And my God's bigger than your God, my God's better than your God, and we'll control our people and keep them on our side with our God. I'm sorry, this argument just doesn't hold water, sorry.
Limitations of speech, property ownership, and the fruits of labor spring up like weeds in a garden that once grew lush with God-granted liberty. Though some of today's secular statists fly the flag of personal freedom, their idea of personal liberty stops at the threshold of secular Sodom and innocence-destroying Gomorrah. Outside of this narrow field of fenceless secularism, they seek with legislative ball and chain the ever-expansive grasp of state in your personal life. To what you can say, what you can eat, what you should make, where you can live, what you can buy, what you can drive, what you can consume, how you can rear your own children. As they secularize our culture and our values, they enslave our mind and squelch our God-given, God-granted liberty. Our children once whispered before each school day, "Almighty God, we acknowledge our dependence on Thee."
So let me get this right. You think atheism tells you what you can eat, what you can drive, what you can say. Just no such thing. In fact, that's exactly what religion's been doing for a long time. You ever heard of blasphemy laws? Blasphemy laws, things that actually go against... say anything against sort of, oh, hang on, God's not right on that bit. Oh, blasphemy, we'll have you in prison and take away your liberties. Liberties have been taken away for centuries from people that just questioned the Bible. And all of a sudden you seem to think that there was some sort of freedom constantly throughout history until atheism turned up. That's absolutely not the case, and absolute rubbish, and I think you know that. And I'm not sure if I'm going to go all the way to the end of your video, actually, because there's too many questions that you need to answer already, and that's the problem. There's too many things that I can go against in this video, and I think that's enough just for some sort of discussion. I'm not going to shout at you. I'm not going to accuse you of being, you know, a moron or something like a lot of people would. But it's a total fallacy, this video of yours. Though quite nicely put together. Peace for now. I hope to hear from you soon to clarify some of these issues. Okay, this is actually directed directly at you.